name is Ethan. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the climate in New Zealand, why it is the way it is, and the effects it has on the country's species and the landscape. First, let's talk about climate. What is a climate? Climate is the weather conditions prevailing in a general area or surroundings over a long period of time. So let's talk about New Zealand's climate. New Zealand's climate is complex and varies from warm subtropical in the far north to cool temperate climates in the far south, with severe alpine conditions in the mountainous area. So you might be wondering why New Zealand's climate varies so much, and so was I till a few hours ago. But luckily I found this perfectly drawn picture of New Zealand with the grid lines from the world on them. These are what we call our south lines. As you can see in this great drawing, New Zealand crosses 3 lines going down south, which means up here in the top can be very warm, and down here in the south it can be very cold. Because down here somewhere, not quite in this drawing, is Antarctica. Here is a better photo of the annual average temperatures for the whole world. As you can see, New Zealand is in the very far right, way down south, and experiences many different temperatures due to its length. You can also see how close the bottom is to Antarctica, and how close the top is to the equator. Now we know how and why New Zealand has different temperatures. Let's talk about our weather, and more specifically, our rainfall. Because of where New Zealand is on the earth, it means that the majority of our weather comes from the west. This is because of our prevailing westerly winds. Why and how these winds are created is a completely different video, but it is very complex and interesting. All we need to focus about is what this means for New Zealand. You may have also noticed this mountain range running down the South Island. You may be thinking, I wonder if that affects New Zealand's climate. And you'd be exactly right in thinking that. As you can see in this picture, we are observing a low pressure system tracking towards New Zealand because of the westerly winds. Let's watch and see what it does. Alright, now as you may have guessed, this low pressure system, spinning clockwise, has tracked all the way into New Zealand because of the prevailing westerly winds. As this low pressure system hits the South Island of New Zealand, it hits these big mountain ranges that I was talking about before. As it hits that, it drops all of its rain right here on the west coast of New Zealand. That is called orographic rainfall. Now what is orographic rainfall, you might ask? Well, let me tell you. Alright, so orographic rainfall. Orographic rainfall is simple, but I drew a picture to make it even more simple for you guys. So, here is a cloud. Here is the Tasman Sea. This is the Southern Alps of the South Island of New Zealand, west coast, east coast. So as these clouds track towards the Southern Alps, they keep going over the west coast and hit the Southern Alps, and watch what they do next. Alright, so the clouds keep tracking across until they hit the Southern Alps. But because this is a big bad mountain range, they can't actually go through the Southern Alps. So they are forced up by the topography, up and over. But as it goes up, the water inside the clouds cools and condenses as it gets higher in elevation. As it gets cooler and as it condenses more, the water form into droplets and drop out of the clouds, hitting the Southern Alps and rushing all the way back down to the ocean through the various rivers they have that are on the west coast. That's pretty cool, hey? Well, I think it is anyway. But what do you think happens next? This doesn't just happen once. This happens all the time. And you want to know why that is? It's because a little something called the water cycle. So let's get into the water cycle. The water cycle is complex and involves state changes in water as well as the physical movement of water between and through ecosystems. The water cycle has 4 main steps. First of that is evaporation. The evaporation is caused by the sun heating up the water particles and turning them into gas. The second stage in the water cycle is condensation. This happens when the water particles that are already as a gas rise up, and as they get colder and cooler as it elevates, they condense and form clouds. The third and fourth step of the water cycle is precipitation and ground runoff, which we already talked about in the orographic rainfall segment. We've now learned where the majority of New Zealand's weather comes from, but weather systems can actually come from any direction and affects the country in many different ways. I'm going to talk about the different parts of the country in a general sense, and how different the landscape is in these parts, and how it affects the species. First, let's talk about the West Coast region. The West Coast region gets a lot of rain, up to 10 metres annually in some parts. Although there is a lot of rain, there is actually an average annual sunshine hour range between 1800 and 1900 hours, which means it's a great climate for growing trees. The trees on the west coast vary from massive big broadleaf conifer forests to beech forests. Because there is so much native trees, it means that this is a great spot for many native birds to hang out. There are a lot more native birds on the west coast than there is anywhere else in New Zealand. There are a few species to note on the west coast. The kotuku, or white heron, has its only breeding place in the Okarito Lagoon, down on the west coast. This is the only breeding place in the entire world for these birds. Another bird to note is the Westland petrel. The Westland petrel has its only breeding colony just south of Punakaki. Next, let's talk about the East Coast region up on the North Island. This region experiences many hours of sunlight and is not like the West Coast of the South Island. Much of this region's forests have been cut down or burnt for farming. This has meant that many of the birdlife species had to abandon ship, but there are a few noteworthy bird species still living in the wetland areas and estuaries. Among these birds are many seabirds breeding in the area, and they include gannets, blue penguins, and various shearwater and petrel species. More common animals found in this region are introduced species, such as sheep and cattle. The warmer climate that this place provides is a great place for growing stone fruits and grapes, and is home to many of New Zealand's wineries. Northland is situated, as you could have guessed, in the very far northern part of New Zealand. It is often described as the winterless north because it seeks so many hours of sunlight per year. This is because of how close it is to the equator. Although, in saying this, Northland can experience many ex-subtropical cyclones coming down from the tropics, which can bring warm and a lot of rain. Northland is like many regions around New Zealand, in the fact that it has been hit by deforestation. A tree to note in Northland is the Kodi tree. The Kodi tree can live up to 2,000 years old and have a girth around the trunk of up to 16 metres. Some say the Kodi is the king of the forest. The Pakutahawa is also very prominent around Northland on the coastal areas. It has beautiful red flowers over Christmas time. Northland is also home to a few predator-free islands, which house animals such as the tuatara and the fairy tern. Alright, so let's have a recap. We first started talking about climate, New Zealand's climate specifically, why it is the way it is. We also talked about our prevailing westerlies and how most of our weather comes from the west, and how that affects the South Island. We also talked about orographic rainfall, if you guys remember that. Pretty cool, eh? The water cycle was our next topic. We talked about how that has an effect on all of the weather in the whole world, but even in New Zealand. We then moved on to talk about the regions in New Zealand and how they are affected by the different climate, and how different species and different trees live within those regions because of the different climates. So I'd like to say thank you for listening and enduring through this video, but I hope you learnt something, because I know I did.